Welcome to everyone who's just joining our session. I see attendees are just filing in now, so we'll just give it a couple of minutes, similar to our previous sessions, to allow everyone to have a minute to join. As we allow, just looking at time. All right. As you begin to join, you'll see a quick poll question on your screen. Please feel free to submit an answer if you would like to do so. And we'll get started in just a minute. For those who are just joining, we're just giving it a minute or two to allow the rest of the folks to join. You may see a poll on your screen. Please feel free to submit an answer if you'd like to do so, and we'll get started in just a minute. So it looks like we have a good group who have joined, a few more still trickling in, but we'll get started and kick off. So thank you again for joining us for today's Women in Privacy panel. My name is Sarah Van Pelt, and I am your Wire Wheel host for this session. Before I introduce the moderator for the session, I'd like to cover a couple housekeeping items. Please note that the views expressed here today by the speakers are their own and not the views of their organizations. And secondly, we hope these sessions will be interactive, so please submit any questions you may have via the question and answer feature in the Zoom at any time during the session. Please do not submit questions via the chat box. And I'm excited to introduce your moderator for today's session, Judy Gordon, who is the Vice President of Product Marketing at WireWheel. Judy, I'll pass it over to you to introduce our panelists and begin the Women in Privacy panel, and I'll be back at the end to wrap up.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Welcome everyone to the Women in Privacy panel. My name is Judy Gordon. I am the SVP of Product Marketing at WireWheel, and we have a great panel here today to talk to us about women leaders in privacy, to talk to us about their experience. So let's start by just introducing everyone. First of all, we have Donna Fraser, who's the SVP of Privacy Initiatives for the Better Business Bureau National Programs. Welcome, Donna.
Thank you.
Teresa Troster-Falk, who's the CEO and founder of Blue Sky Privacy. Susan Markle, who's the VP of Engineering at WireWheel. And Susan Roll, who's the SVP and Chief Privacy Officer at Warner Media. Welcome. So let's start. Susan Roll, maybe you could start and just tell us, how did you get started in privacy?
I love that I'm the first one starting this one, because I've had a very non-linear path to privacy, which may be true for others on this panel too, but I think it's such a new field that it's probably not surprising to find people who didn't take a single privacy course in law school like me, and yet now I'm running a very large team doing privacy at Warner Media, which, for those of you that don't know Warner Media, it is Warner Brothers, Turner, and HBO are sort of some of our key brands. So we includes CNN and Cartoon Network and a whole host of other brands. But my journey really started on Capitol Hill when I was working for the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I was working previously for a member, Russ Feingold, who cared a lot about government surveillance, and he was one of the only members to vote against the Patriot Act. So I sort of entered via what data is the government collecting? And then when I started working for Senator Franken, he was given the first Judiciary Subcommittee on Privacy, Technology, and the Law. And it became an opportunity to really focus on commercial privacy issues, to look at what are companies doing with the data they're collecting. And I think that kicked off some of the first conversations that were really focused on things like facial recognition, things like geolocation data that Apple was collecting and had made public. I then moved to the private sector, where I worked at Nike for a while, doing both privacy work, IP work, and public policy work, and then moved to Warner Media. So that's sort of my journey.
Great. Teresa, do you want to go next?
Sure. I think for those of us who've been in this space a long time, and I've been in this space for almost 20 years, we often talk about a happy accident story. And I did have a happy accident story. It seemed like it was. I had been practicing international trade law in Canada. I had moved to the US. I had taken a couple of years off when my boys were babies and toddlers. We moved to Colorado and I was looking to get back into the workforce. It wasn't possible to practice international trade in the Denver area, at least not the type I had been practicing, but my neighbor was an HR at DoubleClick. And for those of us who, I see Susan and Donna nodding your heads, those of us been in the space a long time know that DoubleClick was sort of the epicenter of the early privacy issues in the non-regulated space. They had purchased a company in Colorado, and it led to an FTC investigation, 50 state AGs. And I was just looking for a job, like coming, from working at home for a while, getting back to the workforce. And there was this job called Privacy Compliance Associate. And I read the job description probably 20 times and still had no idea, what it really meant. The compliance piece was interesting. It was in legal. Privacy was intriguing, but there were no courses in privacy law, when I was in law school. So it seemed like a happy accident story that's what launched my career almost 20 years ago. And from there, I stayed within that organization through its many divestitures and acquisitions and mergers, through Epsilon, and was at Nielsen, always working in-house on the legal side, leading and building privacy programs. I worked as a strategist for a privacy software company, and now I run my own company. But when I think about where I am today and looking back, I'm not sure it was a happy accident story, because when I look back at the influences, I know I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I'm a connector, I'm a learner, and I've always felt the compulsion to do work that's meaningful. And so having the opportunity to talk about this career and our paths in it and women in it, I'm excited about, because there are no limits for your creativity and innovation, your capacity to keep learning, no end to meaningful connections and expansive and warm networking opportunities. And there's no end to work that matters. So happy accident maybe, but I think it was meant to be.
Great. Donna?
Sure. So thank you for having me on this panel. And oddly enough, I did not follow a straight path to privacy, but I was afforded the opportunity to take privacy classes in law school, right? So I was at one of the few law schools, Brooklyn Law School, that was teaching privacy. And oddly enough, my professor in privacy law was Paul Schwartz, who many in the space know. So, I think he taught 3 courses. I took all of them. I went to law school knowing I had a gap between undergrad and law school. I went to law school knowing I wanted to be in the entertainment business. Didn't know what area, but that was all I ever knew, because I came from working in marketing and advertising at a video game company. So I'd only ever been in some form of the entertainment business, knew that I wanted to do law school, but the privacy classes were really intriguing to me, because again, much like entertainment law, to me, it seemed like an amalgamation of different areas of law, because there wasn't this true focus on any one industry or sector. And while I was in law school, COPPA was being legislated. So there was this huge conversation about children's privacy all of a sudden now coming to the forefront. So I took the classes, but didn't follow through on it when I graduated. I went directly in-house and worked as in-house counsel at record labels for several years. Grew, let's not say tired of it, but it became more challenging than I wanted it to be. I took a break, and someone from my former life in the gaming business said, ESRB, the Entertainment Software Rating Board, is looking for a lawyer who knows gaming. I was like, well, that's me on paper. Like, I'm a gamer, I'm a lawyer, that's me. No one said anything about privacy. And the role really was running the privacy program, the COPPA Safe Harbor program. And I didn't know that really until I went in for the interview. And, but I started to hark back to all the things I learned in law school. And it just seemed like the most intriguing thing to be dealing with this particular subject matter in the video game business, right? So an industry that I had a long love for, but these complex issues. And that's how I kind of landed in this space. And it's just grown and grown and grown for me. And, you know, I'm well beyond just the children's space at this point. You know, my current job permits me to deal with just global privacy issues on every level, whether it's children, teen, adults, whatever it is. But I think what I've always enjoyed doing is helping companies really think outside the box and solve their problems, right? I like helping companies just achieve their end goals. I often say that compliance in this space doesn't mean that you can't achieve your end goal. And I think for those of us who are on the compliance side, I never want to be the no police, right? I want to get you to yes. The job is to get you to yes. So how do we get you to yes? And having worked in-house counsel, I understand the challenges that exist between legal and marketing, right? Legal, oftentimes in-house, we are the no police, right? If we haven't done the contract, if we haven't completed A, B, or C, nothing else is happening. And, you know, when I worked in-house at the record label, everyone thought that it was such a glamorous job. I said, let me tell you something. The last people to get tickets to a show are legal. We don't get the fun stuff. We don't get the tickets. No one wants us in the room. But for us, nothing else happens, right? If we don't create the contract, if we don't do the deal, there's no artist. So there's this contention that I understand that exists in-house, that being, you know, outside the circle allows me to kind of be that middle person. So I enjoy the problem solving aspect of it. And there are a lot of problems in the space and a lot of work for us to do.
Nice. And then Susan Markel, you have sort of a different role in privacy than the rest of the panel. So tell us a little bit about your role and how you got started.
Yes, for sure. So I run engineering at WireWheel, as you mentioned. And prior to coming to WireWheel, I worked at mostly in the cybersecurity industry. So 15 years before here, I was doing cybersecurity work. And I guess when I first came to privacy, I didn't realize how different it was than cybersecurity. I think if you talk to folks in that industry, you'll see that a lot of people in cybersecurity believe that privacy is part of that, and I think it is in many ways. But kind of coming and working here for a few years, I see how different it is, and how many topics privacy covers that aren't actually part of what a lot of security engineers are thinking about. So, you know, in some ways, software is software, and one of the really positive things about having the cybersecurity background is that a lot of what we care about with protecting data on a security side, you also care about on the privacy side. I think it's really, for me, underscored the importance of PII and why it is so important. I mean, I think I care a whole lot more about children's data now than I ever have before, and partly because I have kids that are now, you know, on YouTube all the time, which is terrifying, and it's right? But it's been what I thought wasn't going to be a significant jump. I think I'm learning a whole lot about this industry that's been around for a while, but the market is still relatively new. So it's been quite interesting.
So all of you touched on this a little bit, but if you had to give 1, 2, or 3 things that you would say are the reason you're all such successful women leaders in your business, at your business, if you had to give 1, 2, or 3 things that you would say are the reason for your success, what would you say? Teresa, I think you kind of started, you touched on this a little bit. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit.
Yeah, it's probably, when I look back, something that applies to everyone. You know, where do we feel success in our careers? Is it just an achievement, or is it something greater than that? And for me, it's always been something greater. For me, this sense of connection matters. A sense of important work matters. A sense of control and progress matters to me. So what led to my success, if you will, I think, was just learning over time to lean into the types of initiatives and activities that aligned with my strengths. And that's something I would say to anybody who's, whether you're starting your career or shifting your career. I had one piece of great advice from a mentor, more a vocation mentor than not a privacy mentor, but just someone in my life who'd been mentoring people a long time. And she said, Teresa, there's only one question you need to ask yourself as you go through your day, whether it's your volunteer work, whether it's your work, whether it's your time with your children. I mean, did this activity, did this thing that I do leave me drained, or do I still have energy? And start logging that. And over time, you'll get a sense of the kinds of work where you're energized. And that's a sense of being in the flow. And so it's a bit general to say that, but I think that over time, to land where I am, where I'm sort of working harder than I've ever worked, but feeling more energized than I've ever felt and less tired than I've ever been, is having learned to do that, to lean into the kinds of career opportunities that really align with my strengths and my values. And when those things are aligned, I think you'll feel success.
That's great. Donna?
I'm nodding my head because I can definitely relate to what Teresa said. And I think part of this is something that we've all heard, which is when you find the work that you really enjoy, it doesn't feel like work anymore, right? It doesn't feel like a job anymore. And I think that's part of the reason why I've remained in the nonprofit space for over a decade, because I need to feel that I'm doing good and valuable work for me, right? And these are all very, I think, very personal, not just personal anecdotes, but people need to figure out where their boundaries are, what makes them happy, what satisfies them. And, I think that success for me is in part due to perseverance, not having any boundaries with regards to the hard work, right? There's a work ethic that I think we probably all have in common here. And when you're in what has traditionally for so long been a male-dominated space, and success has been defined by masculine qualities, right? We need to be able to define what those female leadership qualities are that keep us all here, and change the trajectory, change what it looks like. And that's part of what keeps me driven, right? I mean, I'm fortunate to work in an organization now where our CEO, Eric Racin, has surrounded himself with some really bright, intelligent women on a C-suite level, which is also empowering for me on a daily level, on a daily basis, to see that and to be exposed to it. But I think that being able to sleep at night, knowing that I've done good work during the day, is really valuable and important for me. And knowing that I have to be an example for people as well. When you lead people, there's a certain responsibility. And I think we all on this panel, I'm sure, have experienced that, where we're cognizant of what we do. And that keeps me driven, wanting to just do the good work, not just for me, but for the people around me.
So real quick, you mentioned the female qualities of leadership. What would you say are the female versus the male qualities of leadership?
And we had talked about this on the pre-call about, why are there so many women? Why are we seeing so many women in the privacy space, right? And I really gave this some thought after we talked. And I think part of it is the amount of, let's call it behavioral science, that goes into privacy, right? Privacy in an online space is not just the statistics of what people do, but why they do what they do, why they make the choices that they make. And that there's something about that I think women with our maternal instincts can kind of, we can target that. There's some.
Did we lose Donna?
I think so.
Yeah.
Tech snafus, they're part of the
I
reality.
know, the part of the fun. It's funny because it's usually me. Oh, we lost you for a bit, Donna. Sorry.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's a tech snafus, no problem.
I think we just need to figure out what it is. Yeah. Technology. That's not male, female, that's just tech.
That's
Um,
tech, that's right.
so-
Susan Markel, what are your keys as being a successful leader?
So Donna hit one of them on perseverance, and I think it's not giving up is a big piece of it. Sometimes I can say, like, personally in my own career, that the opportunities I've had have come at terrible times personally. So like the first time I became a manager, I think I had just had a baby. It was, it just feels like life kind of all jams on you at once. And just knowing that you can kind of grit your teeth and get through it, and having and really leaning on your support network to build your career, even when it's not always easy. I think that not shying away from opportunities when they're there is a big one for me. And then the second one is networks and relationship building. It's a really small world, and the one piece of advice that I always give, not just to women, to anyone that is starting out in their career, is you will definitely, like I say, look around. You will definitely work with some of these folks again if you're good and you do a good job. I think every job I've worked at, I've ended up working with one of those people again. So it is a small world. Building those relationships and leveraging the relationships and working with people that you can trust consistently, and kind of building your networks out. It's a really important piece of building out a career, especially for someone that's young.
And Susan Roll, what would you say are the keys to your success?
Well, it's hard to follow all of that because I completely agree with all of the great comments that have been made by these women. As someone who was in the nonprofit sector and government and then transitioned into the private sector, I think what Teresa and Donna was saying in terms of finding your passion, it was important to me that I could find companies where I felt like I could be an advocate for doing the right thing, that the companies were motivated to be doing the right thing when it came to consumers' data, and they just needed to be pointed in the right direction and helped to get there. And so I think everyone has to find a way to navigate, to get to a place where they're doing something they really love. I completely agree with that. But I think, to be tactical for just a minute, I think that it is very difficult in the privacy space to explain what is happening in these incredibly complicated laws that are happening all around the world. And if you are able to see the big picture, and you're able to lift up and give executives, or in your nonprofit, other leaders, a sense of what's coming, a sense of what really has to happen, and then articulate it into solution-oriented terms, I think those things really, really matter, because it's very easy to get down in the weeds and get sort of very into the nitty-gritty of individual provisions. But I think if you can't boil it up, you can't get companies or other leaders to say, this is really important, and then to make the investment appropriately. So I think that's one tactical piece of advice. And I think another piece of advice I would give people that I am still working on, and the other Susan on this panel probably knows more, is the more technology skills and knowledge you have, the more knowledgeable you will be as an advocate with your business teams and with your tech teams. So if you can develop that information, those skill sets, that language, I think it will make you more persuasive and more effective overall. The last thing I would say is you have to be a good person, and to be a good person, you will ultimately be a good manager. So you need to be thinking about how to get your team to accomplish the things that you don't have the hours in the day to do. And I think that starts with meeting your team with what they want to achieve from a career perspective, and helping to be a good advocate for them. So that was a lot, Judy.
No, it's good. It's great. I want to go back to something actually Donna said about privacy, the privacy space, because I was thinking about this panel all day and looking at the other people on the other panels, and there's a lot of women who are on our privacy panels. And Donna, you've sort of already answered this question. If you want to elaborate more, that would be fine. But just why is it? Why do you think that women are so successful in this industry, especially compared to, as you pointed out, Susan, other technology spaces? Teresa, do you want to start?
Well, this question has come up a lot, and it's very obvious when you go to a privacy conference. I would say now it's like 50-50 men and women, but contrast that to an RSA conference. And the first one I went to was like, oh my gosh, it's a sea of blue suits. Like it couldn't have been more obvious. And so there are a few theories that are floating around. And one was, going back 20 years ago in the unregulated spaces where privacy just wasn't a thing, right? It was just something that sort of had to be done. Like it's a stereotype, but sort of women raise their hands a little more, right? Like, oh, I'll do that too. I'll just take that on. Like there was no obvious career path. It was just, sure, I'll do that. So there was more of that happening among women. That's one theory that, we just raised our hand a little more and we just took that on. It wasn't obvious what it was going to be. Another theory is that, and again, it's a stereotype, but I think there's some validity to the stereotype that, it involves people. It is technology, but really we're talking about data about people, and that women tend to be drawn more to again, it's a stereotype, but we've been drawn more to careers that involve having impact on individuals and people. So that's a component. Those are the two themes that have emerged over the years, as at least in the early years, is sort of explaining how this might have happened.
Yeah, maybe because there's already women, it attracts more women.
Some of that too, yeah.
I think that may be a factor, but I also think the reality is that we need to see this as an opportunity to change the male-dominated tech world. Because the reality of privacy is it used to be the thing that was sort of over here that the IP lawyer or the employment lawyer in-house would pick up because no one else is raising their hand. I mean, that's some of what Teresa's saying. And I think now it has become a strategic portion of many businesses, right? It is how they are thinking about engineering their products. It is how they are thinking about creating opportunities and to disadvantage competitors, but also to build something that consumers want to use. And these are all a very transformational shift that is not just about sort of nuts and bolts compliance for GDPR, but also responding to all the technology changes that are coming with Chrome expiring third-party cookies, with the iOS changes. I mean, these are not privacy changes. These are fundamental business and technology changes, and our expertise as leaders in the privacy space should, I think, enable more people and should be a signal to other younger women that now is an opportunity. If you know something about privacy, like get the skill set so you can also be the leader on data strategy, on technology decisions in your business, because all of those things are very intertwined.
And Susan Markel is the leader of data strategy and data at Wirewheel. What are your thoughts?
So I think Teresa said it. Within cybersecurity, it was dominated by men. I think it was like 85 or 89% of security professionals a few years ago were men. And I totally agree with the diversity begets diversity. You want to, if I'm going to work with a team, I want to work with people that I can relate to. And it's tough to relate to a leadership team that's all white men when you're not a white man. And so that was one of the things that attracted me to Wirewheel, is that there were women that I talked to as part of the interview process. And I've worked at positions where there were no women on the board, no women in leadership positions. I worked at one job where I was the most senior leader and I was not that senior. So it was, I totally agree that the more diversity there is, either gender or otherwise, on a team, the more likely you are to attract more people of a diverse nature. So I couldn't possibly agree with that more.
And Donna, as a woman in gamer, that also must be a very male.
Yeah, absolutely. A very male-dominated industry. But, in listening to everybody, I keep thinking back to, it wasn't that long ago when there were no opportunities in-house, right? You didn't have chief privacy officers in-house. You didn't have any of these roles that now exist. And I think as women, we do have a certain obligation to bring other women along. And I think that's what we see happening, is that others are just coming along.
So, Susan Roll, you talked a little bit about technology and that people and women, especially in the privacy space, need to learn more about technology. Can you talk a little bit about where should we start? Where should people who, maybe technology is a daunting thing, where should they start?
I think that's totally fair. I mean, look, if I could rewind the clock, I would take classes in coding, and I probably should make time to do that because I think if you actually know how to code, you speak an entirely different language for the people and developers who have to build a lot of this into their products from the get-go. I think if that's outside of the realm of possibility for whatever reason, I think you should focus on learning how the advertising and marketing world works. And that's the more that you can understand everything touching the big platforms, their products, the nature with which they digest data, how those things all flow together, what that really operationally looks like for many different types of businesses. I think just the more effective you're going to be, because at the end of the day, pretty much every business is dependent on the major platforms in some way, and they control the advertising world on the buy side and the sell side. Understanding how all of that works, whether it's to power Donna's games, whether it's to serve up advertising, for New York Times on a first party basis, whether it's to, sell you your next pair of Nike shoes. Like those are all things that, fundamentally, most of that's happening on a handful of platforms.
And I'll add to that I think that it wasn't so long ago that there was this clear delineation between privacy practices and ad practices, right? And it's the ad practices now that are getting companies in trouble with the data collection that's happening behind the scenes, right? So when you look at some of the cases that are coming forth, just in New York, especially in the kid space, the tracking, right? The tracking tools and companies not knowing what they're doing behind the scenes, and there's all this data that's being collected about children, about parents, and nobody knowing that this is actually going on behind the scenes, that you don't, as a first party, know what your third party ad networks and advertisers are doing. I think it's one of the ways that if you're trying to get into this space, looking at what the FTC is focusing on, looking at what the state AGs are focusing on, looking at the legislative proposals that are coming up the pike, gives you a sense of where this is all heading. When you look at what's happening in California, where California is, typically that's where the nation goes, right? So what is happening there that we all need to be looking at? It's fascinating. And I think that what keeps the privacy space so robust is that no 2 days are the same, right? I think that's part of the thing that we probably don't like most about our jobs, that no 2 days are the same. You don't know what you're walking into every day. And it's very challenging. And as we become more global about this, companies become more global in their practices. It's not sectoral anymore. And as we here in the United States talk about a federal privacy law, oh my gosh, in a few years, we'll all be quite busy trying to figure out what that's going to look like. And I think it's exciting.
So Teresa, talking about ad tech, it sounds like the beginning of your career at DoubleClick, right?
Yeah. Yes, it certainly was. It certainly was. And it's tricky issues, very, very tricky issues. But picking up on some things Susan said, and just to those of you who are just starting out in this career, and for those of us who are having to morph as we go along, I mean, this becoming more and more technical, I don't think is just a nice value add anymore, or something that gives me a little differentiation. I think will be a requirement. If you look at some trends, I think I read this correctly, that just last week, the Brazilian Data Protection Authority released guidelines on the role of the DPO, like what should that DPO look like? And the requirement is that that person sit in IT. You have a data protection officer that's required to be in IT. So I think, the day is coming when it's not just, you should do this, this is interesting, but you need to do it. And so, one thing that I did along the way, because I wasn't a technology person, I was a legal person, and I realized how much misunderstanding there was just from the use of terminology. Like, you'd use a term that seemed obvious, like personal information, but it meant something completely, different in an IT setting. Or so asking to just sit on product development meetings, just be in the background, be included in those IT meetings, get to know those teams, I think is really useful and practical if you're just beginning, or even if you're evolving in your career. It's deepening those relationships and those conversations being more and more integrated. Learning also that as you take more leadership positions and feel more confident about your positions, be prepared to be really unpopular. And that's hard. I think it's hard for anybody. It's hard for women. But nothing gave me greater pleasure than years later, after taking some very strong positions in some of the companies I worked with that were very unpopular, but I knew they were the right thing. My gut told me that maybe there wasn't a lot, it was a gray area, but it was the right thing to do. And sure enough, there was an incident, or there was a Wall Street Journal article, and years later bumping into some of those executives at the company who had not agreed with the position that the privacy team was taking, but coming back after and saying, wow, we really did the right thing there, didn't we? That was good that we did that. And it's like,
that was so smart of us.
Yeah, right. Like, we were really ahead of things. And seeing them at privacy conference, like, you don't have to say anything. You just, it gives you did the right thing, but be prepared to be unpopular along the way. And you have to grow a stomach for that if you don't have it naturally.
So Susan Markel, from a software developer's perspective, what kind of advice would you give to you could talk to our Chief Privacy Officer now, who's listening in. What kind of advice would you give to a privacy officer when talking
I think
development?
I think a lot of it's been touched on. I think common language is a big thing. Because sometimes PII is personal information is a great example. Like there have been a number of times when someone said, well, do you have personal information? And I'm like, well, what specifically do you mean by personal information? Like, how are we specifically defining it? Because how an engineer thinks about it is different than how a privacy expert thinks about it. And they're like, IP address is a perfect example. It's not something you generally think of as identifying because it's just an IP address. So that's one. I think the other thing that was touched on was relationship building. I think that relationship building is really important, because then when you get to the tough stuff, you already have that relationship. You can already have that conversation about what you're doing right or what you're doing wrong. And then the third thing I was thinking of, and now it just left me, was common language that I can't remember what the third one was, but it was brilliant, I'm sure.
I'm sure. So we have actually a question. We talked about women in the privacy space, but someone asked a question about women of color. How well represented are women of color in this privacy space? And I guess if you look at our panel today, and even our panels for the day, but in general, what would you say? I guess, Donna, if you want to start.
Sure. Sadly, I don't think we're well represented. I will say that, if I just take my experiences at attending the IAPP conferences, essentially from the beginning until present day, there's more of us, but still a very small portion of women in color that I encounter in the space. There may be more on the policy side. I think all of us here are talking more about the practical implementation side of the business. There may be more on the policy side. That's something to consider, right? What side of privacy do you want to be on? Because there are policy wonks, there are implementation people, there are people who kind of, do both. But unfortunately, I don't think the privacy space is that much more different than most other industries with regards to representation of women of color, especially in senior roles. And we have, quite frankly, a lot of work to do. I have a lot of work to do.
Well, I don't think it's all on you, Donna. I think we've
No,
been definitely not. I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot, just because we we're focusing a tremendous amount on diversity initiatives at our company. And I think it's something I personally care a lot about. I think a diverse team is a stronger team. And the reality that I've sort of seen over time is that this problem is a problem in the legal world, and it is a problem in the technology world. And so when you combine those two things together, I think we do not have enough people of color, generally, women or men, in this space. And when you look at the statistics at the big technology companies in terms of diversity, I mean, they are appallingly low. Like they just are appallingly low. And I think that speaks to a problem in terms of both hiring, but also making sure we have a good pipeline for developing these skills, growing the talent, mentoring people of color, and bringing them into more senior leadership roles. So I think we have ways to go.
So Susan, can you talk a little bit more about the kinds of things that you're doing? I know Donna, you're also very involved in your business. The kinds of things you're doing in your job to mentor people and.
Yeah, in terms of at sort of a more granular level for my team generally, I'm sort of trying to figure out how we create more diversity in some of our more junior positions, lawyers and non-lawyers, as a way of being able to bring people up. It's also just for the hiring we are doing, we are making it a priority to come up with a diverse slate of top candidates. And that, that from my perspective has yielded more diversity just out of the gates, saying to my HR teams, like, I want you to find me diverse candidates, period. And we've brought in a number of really, really strong people that are people of color. I mean, I think we still have a ways to go. And our company as a whole, both at Warner Media and AT&T, are doing a tremendous number of things across the company, being much more public about statistics so that we can know where there's room for growth. I think talking about this not just as a diversity issue, but as an equity issue, that once we have people on staff, we need to mentor them. We need to provide opportunities for them for advancement so they can grow in their careers, so we don't face attrition problems. And so that we ultimately are accelerating the growth of people who may not have the same networks, to the other Susan's point. I mean, at the end of the day, like, I do think networking really, really matters. And I think the reality is that diverse people in our organizations oftentimes don't have the networks with some of the most senior people at the company who are frequently white. So I think that is something we just all need to be actively working to change, recognizing it's an issue and then working to address that issue. But I'd welcome other thoughts, because I think there's always more to learn in this space.
Absolutely. And I think part of this exercise that we're all going through, both I think personally and professionally and on a corporate level and otherwise, is these difficult conversations that need to happen, right? And I think people are understanding that these conversations are vital. At BBB National Programs, we have a diversity, inclusion, and belonging committee that I do co-chair. And I think what is so promising to me is how engaged this committee is. It's a very diverse group of people. And I think when you have a diverse base of employees, when people are around each other, look, we should mirror what every company should mirror what the rest of the nation looks like, right? And there's no reason why we can't do that. And we need to figure out how to find these people who can fit these roles. I'm trying to fill a very senior, VP role right now, and so it is a bit of a niche area, but there's flexibility in how niche it needs to be and what I need for you to have coming in the door versus what you can learn. And we need to find flexibility when we're actually looking to fill these roles sometimes. But it is still challenging. And but the conversations about diversity and inclusion are vital, I think, in surviving, for companies to survive. I just think, Susan, to your point about these large tech companies whose numbers are so low, I'm not sure how they continue to survive 5-10 years from now when they don't reflect the user base of their products. Because at some point they're going to hit a wall, because the user is going to recognize that you're not even thinking about me when you're developing this. They're going to hit a wall. So the conversations, I think, are real and impactful, both financially and otherwise.
I totally agree. I mean, the NASDAQ announcement that says you now need one person of color and one woman
Right.
on the board, it's like, that should happen 30 years ago.
Right.
Right? Isn't that crazy?
You know, it's like baby steps. We need to recognize that the world is not moving at baby steps, and companies really need to lean in to make.
Mhm.
To that end, though, I think that that was a significant announcement. 30 years too late, one might argue, but if that is to go forward, you will start to see change, I think, much more quickly, because now you do have that representation at the board level, and that trickles down. So I think that's a very significant development.
Mhm.
I hope it does go through.
Yeah. Susan Markel, anything to add on mentoring? And
I mean, I was nodding vigorously with what Donna was saying, especially, I think there's having the different perspectives is really important. There was something Donna said that, like, it's ringing in my ears about your users. And when I started here at WireWheel, it was mostly men on the engineering team. And it was understanding that privacy was more 50-50. It was very clear, like, we had to do something like pretty different, because it really is. We didn't have people developing the software that were representative of our users. And I think that's something that, for me, it was super clear. I think probably for a lot of engineering leaders, it's not clear. That's not something that they think about. And I think that's really understanding who our users are and how we need to support people and the perspectives that people come at. I think it's super, super, super important. I think Tanisha on an earlier call mentioned, like, reviewing algorithms for diversity and making sure you're including, and diversity and inclusion, making sure you're including everyone. You know, I think about it a lot just as a woman. I'm smaller than I'm petite, so, like, things don't fit me. And for my girls, it's describing that same thing. You have to consider the users that you have, and that, people are shaped differently, they're sized differently, they think differently, they interact with things differently just based on their perspectives. So I totally agree with everything that's been said.
great. All right, so we have basically 2 more minutes left of the panel. This has been really inspirational, especially, I have to say, it's so nice to hear how much everyone really loves what they're doing. It's great. It's really great to hear that. But if you were to give 1 or 2 pieces of advice, and you've given advice along the way, but to someone just starting out in their career, what would you say? And let's start with Susan Markel.
What do I say? Don't burn bridges would be my number one. I go back to the networks and relationships. They get you everywhere in life, whether it's directly or indirectly. My biggest piece of advice would be don't burn bridges.
Teresa.
Lean into your strengths and values. That's, I think, where you'll be happiest. If you're young in your career, learn all the skills you can. Our profession is becoming more skill-based, and network as expansively as you can. And I'll just add, I know you didn't ask this, but I want to say that I'm very passionate about giving new people opportunities to speak. I mean, Susan, Dawn, and I, we've spoken on hundreds of panels and have these opportunities all the time. But when I do panels now, I like to bring in new voices. And I also do many video recordings with folks on trending privacy topics or operational practical things. So please reach out to me, because I'd love to include new people in those kinds of things. So take advantage of opportunities is the other point.
Great. Donna.
I think it's 2 things. One is really just, again, goes back to my comment about perseverance. Really stay the course, right? If this is something you really want to do, just persevere, stay the course. And in addition to not burning bridges and networking, finding a good mentor. I think we are all committed as mentors and finding. It's not hard to find, right? I think when you go up to somebody and say, "Look, I've been following you," or I like what I heard you say, or whatever it is, feeding the ego doesn't take much. You know, we all respond to it in different ways, but I think, again, we have an obligation to pay it forward. And I think part of that is taking on mentees and being a good mentor. So reach out and find that person that is a good fit for you.
And Susan Roll.
Well, I totally agree on mentoring. I think it's the one of the most critical things you can do, because if you find someone who can be your advocate and your champion and who you can learn from and who you can grow from, and it's maybe not one person, most of the time this isn't one person, but I think that's going to be both critical for career advancement and also for growth, because I think at the end of the day, you want to be bold, you want to be courageous, and you want to say yes to new opportunities. Because if you're those things, and I think women are a little bit more have more of a tendency to sort of step back and worry they're not qualified for something, be too shy about whether or not they can really take it on. Are they over-resourced? Can they give 110%? And if not, they say no, as a very broad general stereotype. I think that is to our detriment. I think if you can find a way to learn and grow and take on new opportunities, and you will ultimately get to a point where you develop both your own confidence and you show people you're really good at what you do. You don't have to know all of it. You just have to know the right people to ask for help. And if you have the perseverance and follow through, I think you will, competence begets more work as a general rule in any entity. And the more that you show that you can just get stuff done and you're competent, I think the more that, that people will seek you out. But it starts with building your own confidence to say yes. And I think that's an important piece.
Great, thank you. Now I'll hand it off to you, Sarah, to close us out.
Perfect. Thank you, Judy. And this concludes this really inspiring and amazing session. I'm happy I was able to listen in and be a part of it. So thank you again to all of our speakers and attendees. I'd like to remind everyone that a recording of this and all of our other sessions will be made available after the conference concludes. On your screen, you should see the agenda for the rest of the day, which is almost concluded, but we have one, but certainly not least, session left. Excuse me. The next session is the closing keynote featuring Alistair McTaggart, which begins at 6 p.m., which you definitely will not want to miss. So hopefully we will see you there, and I hope you guys all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.